We call it the cloud, We imagine all our data, our software, our AI just floating up there in the ether.
Yeah, totally weightless.
Right.
Yeah.
Completely detached from the messy physical reality of life on Earth. But the machinery actually running our world is, it is unimaginably heavy.
And it runs incredibly hot.
Exactly. And right now, it is cracking under the pressure of its own environment.
Ah.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at the violent collision between our infinite digital ambitions and our very fragile physical reality.
It's a really critical moment.
It is. Today, we are going to connect the dots between billion-dollar global trade whiplash, the sprawling trillion-dollar physical footprint of artificial intelligence, and the extreme global weather patterns that are actively threatening to melt the infrastructure, keeping it all online.
Yeah, and when you look at the raw data coming in from around the globe this week, it can feel like you are examining completely different planets.
Oh, absolutely.
You see a brand new U.S. tariff on polysilicon on one page, and then, a dried up river in Europe on the next, and a new AI coding tool from Meta on another.
But they're connected.
Deeply, inextricably linked. They're all stress points in the exact same global system.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the absolute foundational layer of these systems, which is, the flow of money and trade.
Right, the economics.
Because the global trade situation right now is in a state of severe whiplash. The Trump administration just refunded roughly $100 billion with a B that was collected under tariffs the Supreme Court later invalidated.
That is a massive rotation of capital to process all at once.
That's huge.
Right. Returning $100 billion to importers significantly alters corporate cash flows and balance sheets, almost overnight.
But wait, simultaneously, 25 states are actively challenging the replacement tariffs that were imposed after the court rejected that first batch.
Exactly. And the markets are watching closely because that capital injection, it could spur immediate domestic investment or...
It gets tied up in court.
Yeah, given the pushback from those 25 states, it could simply generate a massive new wave of gridlocked litigation just tracking those funds in legal purgatory.
And while all that money is just sloshing around in the courts, the administration also introduced a brand new 15% tariff on polysilicon.
A critical material.
Right. And honestly, this feels like a retail store forcing you to take a refund at the cash register only to charge you a brand new cover charge at the exit door.
That's a good way to put it.
Because polysilicon is the bedrock material for solar panels and semiconductor manufacturing.
Yes, it is.
And the stated goal here is to counter Chinese dominance in those specific supply chains. But how does slapping a 15% tariff on polysilicon actually help us if it penalizes the very solar developers and chip makers we're desperately trying to build up domestically?
Well, it highlights the friction between short-term economic pain and long-term geopolitical strategy.
Right.
Polysilicon manufacturing is incredibly energy-intensive and requires massive scale.
Which China has cornered.
Exactly. China has subsidized it heavily to corner the global market. So the administration is trying to forcefully restructure that global supply chain to favor domestic production.
But you can't just snap your fingers and build a factory.
No, you cannot simply manifest a domestic supply chain overnight. In the short term, you are drastically increasing the input costs for the exact domestic industries you are trying to protect.
Yeah, it's creating immediate uncertainty for the developers who rely on those materials. You are raising the cost of the raw materials they need to survive, forcing them to absorb the margins or pass the cost on to consumers.
Precisely.
And speaking of geopolitical friction and energy costs, we are seeing equally complex maneuvering in the Middle East right now regarding the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes, the shipping lanes.
Right. The U.S. and Iran are engaged in high-level talks aimed at ending their conflict and reopening the strait. And President Donald Trump has described the negotiations positively, though, major details remain unresolved.
There's still a long way to go.
But the most surprising detail here is a proposed navigation arrangement between Iran and Oman. It would essentially give Tehran significant control over ships entering the Gulf.
Which fundamentally alters the security dynamic in one of the world's most critical oil choke points.
Wait, so if Tehran is gaining control over Gulf shipping, shouldn't the energy markets be panicking? Like, why has the expectation of this agreement actually pushed global oil prices lower?
Well, it comes down to the psychology of commodity markets.
Okay.
Markets hate uncertainty more than they hate unfavorable terms. The current situation in the Strait is chaotic.
Oh, yeah. Constant disruptions.
Right, there are disruptions. Insurance premiums for cargo ships are astronomical, and the threat of arbitrary escalation is, ever present.
So even a bad deal is better than no deal.
Basically, even if an Iran-Oman arrangement grants Tehran more oversight, it formalizes the process. It creates a predictable framework for navigation.
I see.
The markets are anticipating that this formalization will stabilize the actual flow of oil, sort of overriding the geopolitical anxiety.
Wow. And that resulting drop in energy prices is having a fascinating ripple effect all the way back to Washington. Lower energy costs immediately reduced inflation expectations across the broader economy.
Which in turn reduces the forecasts for a near-term Federal Reserve rate increase.
It is wild how a navigation agreement in the Gulf of Oman basically acts as a pressure valve for a central banker in Washington.
It really is all connected.
And that brings us perfectly to the industries that are most desperate for those semiconductors we were just talking about, and the cheap energy to run them. Let's pivot to artificial intelligence.
The big topic.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. The sci-fi narrative of AI, the idea that it's going to wake up tomorrow, recursively improve itself, and trigger this magical runaway intelligence explosion, that concept remains highly disputed.
Entirely unproven, actually. The gap between those grand apocalyptic technological claims and the practical reality is shaping the entire economic landscape right now.
Because they're actually putting it to work.
Exactly. The industry is aggressively moving away from the speculative hype phase and into hard operational deployment.
It's becoming a blue-collar tech story. Like, look at what Meta just launched, MuseSpark 1.2.
Right.
It's a highly capable AI coding tool, but the developers are heavily emphasizing that any changes it makes still require human review before going into production.
Enterprises are actively tightening their permissions. They want a human in the loop before these agents can execute raw code or, transfer external data.
At the same time, Anthropic is completely changing its hardware strategy. They're creating an internal chip design team.
Which is a huge shift.
Huge. They want to build processors optimized specifically for their Claude model so they don't have to rely so heavily on external semiconductor suppliers.
They're actively trying to bypass the exact polysilicon and semiconductor supply chain bottlenecks we were just analyzing.
Wow, yeah.
And we are seeing the financial realities of this practical deployment phase crystallize everywhere.
Oh, absolutely.
European tech companies established traditional enterprise vendors like SAP, Capgemini, Soprasteria, and OVH Cloud. They are suddenly reporting massive surges in AI-related demand.
But wait, this isn't for generating poetry or deepfakes, right?
No. Businesses are deploying AI across finance, administration, and back-office logistics. It is becoming standard enterprise utility software.
And the financial pressure is immense. Shareholders for Samsung and SK Hynix are currently demanding larger payouts because of the massive cash piles being generated specifically by AI memory chip demand.
The hardware makers are swimming in cash.
And Google is completely restructuring its AI leadership to balance its long-term scientific research against immediate near-term commercial competition. And that move is actively affecting Alphabet shares.
It is touching every sector. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon is leading a massive cross-industry effort bringing tech and finance together.
What for?
To coordinate responses to the very practical risks of AI, things like autonomous agent failures, sophisticated fraud, and automated financial transactions. Wow. But the detail that completely stopped me in my tracks was the physical footprint required to run all of this. Microsoft, Meta, Oracle, Amazon, and Alphabet have collectively retained more than $1 trillion in future lease commitments, principally for data centers.
Yeah.
$1 trillion.
What's fascinating here is that AI has definitively ceased to be a software story. It is a massive physical and financial liability.
A liability.
Yes. Federal Reserve officials are actively issuing warnings that these enormous AI infrastructure obligations could create broader systemic financial vulnerabilities if the economic returns don't match the capital expenditure.
Right, because I look at that $1 trillion figure, and it looks exactly like the gold rush, except instead of panning for gold, we are in a colossal real estate and hardware race.
Exactly.
But here's my question. If the intelligence explosion really is just hype, and the growth curve of enterprise AI adoption flattens out, how do these companies unwind $1 trillion in physical real estate? Are big tech companies trapping themselves in the biggest physical infrastructure bubble in history? Well, they are making a highly leveraged bet on the future, but unwinding those leases isn't as simple as canceling a software subscription.
No, you can't just click unsubscribe on a data center.
Right. They are building the physical plant for a cognitive revolution, and those data centers require specialized zoning, custom power substations, and dedicated water lines.
Which are not cheap.
Not at all. If demand slows, they are left holding massive, highly specialized concrete boxes that cannot easily be repurposed for anything else.
Right.
But the real vulnerability isn't just the financial leverage. To run that trillion-dollar infrastructure, you need immense amounts of raw electrical power, and you need immense amounts of cooling.
And that brings us to the absolute friction point of our current reality. Because the Earth's environment is currently crippling the energy grids required to run those concrete boxes.
Yes, we are building the most computationally advanced technology in human history, and its Achilles heel is the basic physical environment it sits in.
It's wild.
Europe is currently experiencing a severe compounding heat wave with exceptional temperatures recorded across Austria and Slovakia. But the critical failure point for their power grid is the rivers.
The rivers. I mean, Hungary's only nuclear plant is currently offline. Completely offline. Because the water levels in the Danube River are simply too low to run the cooling operations.
And Slovenia had to drastically reduce its own nuclear output.
Because the river temperatures were too high to provide adequate cooling for their reactors.
Right. To understand why that happens, you have to look at the mechanics of thermal power generation. Nuclear plants rely on pulling massive volumes of cold water from nearby rivers to absorb the extreme heat generated by the reactors, and then they discharge that warmer water back into the river. If the river level drops too low, the intake pipes literally cannot pull enough volume.
But even if the water is there.
Even if the water is there, if the ambient temperature of the river is already too high, discharging reactor heat into it would literally boil the local ecosystem.
Wow.
It would violate environmental operating limits. So the plant has no choice but to throttle down or shut off entirely.
And on top of that, historically, low water levels in the Rhine River are restricting physical cargo movement, severely disrupting the transportation of fuel, chemicals, and industrial materials across the continent.
It is a massive physical bottleneck.
It is a brutal, almost comical irony. We are spending $1 trillion building advanced AI data centers, and the entire power grid is relying on ancient infrastructure like rivers to keep from melting down.
It really puts it in perspective.
It's exactly like having a top-of-the-line $10,000 gaming computer, but you leave it sitting in the direct summer sun and the liquid cooling system fails.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how advanced the processor is, the motherboard will throttle the entire system down to save itself from catching fire.
Yep, the physical limits kick in.
So if these massive data centers rely entirely on 20th century river systems to keep from melting, what is the backup plan for big tech when those rivers dry up? Are they just assuming the water will return?
Currently, there is no viable, scalable backup plan that doesn't involve vastly more expensive and energy-intensive closed-loop cooling systems. The vulnerability is baked into the architecture.
That is terrifying.
And the data from North America paints an even more severe picture of that environmental fragility.
Yeah, in Washington state alone, 67,000 people remained under evacuation orders due to hotter, drier, and windier conditions.
Wildfires.
Right. There are 16 uncontained fires burning across more than 672 square miles. Emergency services have deployed approximately 7,000 personnel.
It's a massive mobilization.
And around 850 buildings have been destroyed in the Spokane area alone, fundamentally disrupting local electricity, communications, and transportation.
And investigators determined the 3 principal Spokane fires were human-caused.
Yeah, with one man already charged with first-degree arson for the Old Trails fire.
Looking north to Canada, the scale of the disruption is staggering. There are nearly 700 active fires burning, consuming 3.8 million hectares of land.
Unbelievable.
But the most crucial data point here is a new attribution study regarding those specific fires. The study found that human-driven warming literally doubled the likelihood of the fire-prone conditions affecting Canada right now.
Doubled it.
Researchers have concluded that extreme Canadian fire conditions that we once expected to occur every 4 decades could now occur every few years.
Every few years. And NOAA is actively monitoring a strengthening El Niño pattern that is expected to further influence heat, rainfall, and ocean conditions, all the way into 2027.
The timeline is extending.
We aren't just talking about a bad summer that we have to tough out. We are talking about a fundamental, permanent baseline shift in the physical operating environment of the planet.
And these systemic failures, the climate, the power grid, the complex supply chains, they are not just abstract data points for tech executives and government officials to manage on a spreadsheet.
No, they affect everyone.
They are actively displacing everyday people and exposing incredibly deep vulnerabilities in our daily lives, our health, and our global security.
So what does this all mean? Honestly, looking at the sheer volume of these disruptions, I feel a wave of overwhelm just thinking about the cognitive load required of you, the listener, to simply exist right now.
It is a lot to process.
You're trying to understand how AI is changing your industry, you're worrying about the global supply chain, and at the exact same time, you have to worry about whether your fast food order is going to put you in the hospital.
The food safety issue.
Yes. Federal health authorities have just expanded an investigation into a cyclosporiasis outbreak. It's been linked to iceberg lettuce from central Mexico that was served at Taco Bell restaurants, and it has already spread across 15 states.
Which happens incredibly fast.
The FDA and CDC are urging consumers to rely strictly on official health notices rather than unofficial social media lists, as the gastrointestinal illness it causes can be prolonged and require prescription treatment. But how does a local agricultural issue in central Mexico instantly trigger a health crisis across 15 U.S. states before authorities can even issue a warning?
It is the terrifying efficiency of modern just-in-time logistics.
Right.
Produce is no longer farm to table. Lettuce from dozens of different farms is shipped to centralized processing facilities where it is washed in massive batches, cross-contaminated, bagged, and loaded onto a fleet of refrigerated trucks.
It just fans out across the country.
Within 24 hours, a single contaminated batch from one field in Mexico is physically distributed to hundreds of restaurants across half a continent. By the time patient zero even begins to show symptoms, the product has already been consumed across 15 states.
Wow.
Our physical supply chains move at digital speeds, meaning vulnerabilities replicate instantly.
And this food supply vulnerability is happening against a backdrop of dangerous physical conditions. Extreme heat is pounding the U.S.
Everywhere, it seems.
Inland California is preparing for temperatures above 110 degrees. Houston is expecting heat indices from 103 to 108 degrees. Even parts of Connecticut are seeing apparent temperatures near 100 degrees with the stifling humidity.
The heat is inescapable.
And while our physical infrastructure is literally melting and our supply chains are struggling to keep food safe, you look at Washington and see an establishment utterly distracted by its own internal friction.
The institutions meant to regulate and fix this hardware are entirely consumed by their own administrative loops.
You see Abdul El-Sayed consolidating Democratic support after winning Michigan's closely watched Senate primary. You see Representative Max Miller of Ohio under investigation by the House Ethics Committee over domestic abuse allegations, which, he strongly denies.
Right.
At the federal level, officials are debating new incentives to encourage employers to expand paid family leave. And in the courts, a federal judge just ordered the government to pay a university association's legal expenses in a protracted dispute over Pentagon research funding.
Just endless procedures.
The political machinery is grinding away on purely internal software bugs while the server room is on fire.
And that institutional distraction extends to the most critical layers of national security. The physical vulnerabilities we are seeing in the climate and the grid are mirrored in our defense architecture.
How so?
Well, domestically, there's an ongoing investigation into an air traffic control incident involving Marine One near Reagan National Airport.
Right.
But internationally, the physical threats are incredibly acute. Germany is currently investigating an explosive-laden drone discovered near Ukrainian cargo aircraft at the Leipzig-Halle airport.
That's a major escalation.
German authorities are actively looking into foreign involvement, though Russia has firmly denied responsibility. In Ukraine, Russian strikes recently killed at least 17 people, leading Kyiv to urgently request more interceptor missiles from its allies.
And didn't Ukraine report North Korean troops?
Yes. Ukraine also reported that a North Korean missile unit had actively deployed inside Russia to support Moscow's war effort.
And this ties directly back to the very limits of physical reality we started with. We have a report indicating that the United States have used virtually all of its available long-range precision missiles during recent operations.
The stockpile is depleted.
We are literally running out of the physical hardware required for modern defense. Why can't the Pentagon simply order the defense contractors to manufacture more missiles immediately?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you realize that a precision missile is subject to the exact same physical bottlenecks as an AI data center. You cannot simply 3D print a long-range precision weapon overnight. They require highly specialized components, specifically the advanced semiconductors that rely on the exact polysilicon supply chains currently bottlenecked by the new 15% tariffs.
It all comes back to the tariffs and the raw materials.
Exactly. Those components are assembled in manufacturing facilities vulnerable to the same power grid failures and extreme heat waves affecting the rest of the country.
And transported on the same failing infrastructure.
Right. They rely on raw materials transported along rivers and shipping lanes currently restricted by drought and geopolitical tension. The friction of transition is everywhere.
Yeah.
The old systems, traditional agricultural logistics, 20th century warfare manufacturing, fossil fuel power grids, they are structurally failing to adapt to these massive new stressors. We are forcing a physical world to operate at digital speeds, and the hardware is breaking.
The hardware is breaking. That is exactly it. We've covered incredible ground today.
We really have.
We started with the massive capital rotation of $100 billion in tariff refunds and the supply chain friction of new polysilicon tariffs.
Right.
We trace that directly to the $1 trillion physical infrastructure bubble being built for AI, and then examined how the extreme heat and low rivers in Europe and North America are threatening to literally melt that digital infrastructure down.
It's all part of the same system.
And we ended with the very real human toll, from the sheer speed of a 15-state food outbreak to the depletion of our most critical defense stockpiles. It is a stark reminder that our entire digital age remains utterly and entirely dependent on our physical reality.
Understanding those physical bottlenecks and how they limit our digital ambitions is the only way to accurately predict what happens next.
And that leads me to a final provocative thought for you to mull over. We noted earlier that researchers are beginning to actively use AI to automate complex portions of scientific analysis, experiment design, and data classification.
Right, the tools are getting smarter.
So here's the question. Could the very AI technology that is currently demanding $1 trillion in concrete data centers, the exact same technology that is currently stressing our global energy grids to the breaking point, actually be the tool we eventually use to solve the climate and infrastructure crises it is currently exacerbating?
Are we building the problem or the solution?
Exactly. Are we just building a massive new problem, or are we actively building the only intelligence capable of finding the solution?
That tension between the problem and the cure is the defining question of the next decade.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We know your time is valuable, and we hope this helped you cut through the noise, understand the mechanics of the world around you, and avoid the information overload. Just remember, the next time someone talks about the magical weightlessness of the cloud, you'll know that the cloud is just a massive, incredibly hot physical computer sitting somewhere on a very fragile planet. Keep learning, and we will catch you next time.